Hey everyone, and welcome back to Build UX. In this episode of the CRM Inbox series, we're going to continue working on the message detail pane, starting off with some attachment preview icons and then finalizing the design. Where we left off on the last episode is we created these tooltip and message highlight components, and these can be found in our atoms page. At this point, we're building up such a strong library of components that if we look at the message detail pane reference that we have here, the only thing remaining that we haven't already componentized are these attachment preview icons. So let's dive right into making these. I'm going to control click on one of these just so we can deep select it. And it looks like we have a 64 by 64 rounded rectangle with a 24 pixel corner radius. So I'll just keep that in mind. We can go to our atoms page here. Let's drag out a new frame of any size, and we'll call this frame attachment previews. And this will be for the dark theme. I'm going to set the background color to main background dark. Let's get this arranged with our other frames here. Drag this to the bottom of our layers panel. Now inside of here, all we need is a rectangle. This will be 64 by 64. And we have that 24 pixel corner radius. I'm going to leave it this default gray for now, since this is merely a placeholder for actual attachment images. In terms of effects, we have a drop shadow that we can apply. So let's do elevation to dark. And this is quite a simple component. So right now we're actually going to componentize it right away. We're going to use Control Command plus Alt Option and K. And with this, let's rename this to attachment preview. And for the dark theme. With that nested layer, this can be the attachment preview image. So let's name that accordingly. All right, let's get it arranged in our frame here with 32 pixels of padding everywhere. And let's work on that second variation where we have a PDF or document attachment. From here, one thing we can do is simply detach this instance since they're pretty unique. So I want to not really have inheritance from the normal attachment preview. So we can use Control Command plus Alt Option and B to detach this instance from its parent. Drag this down in our layers panel. And let's rename this layer to be the background of our attachment preview. If we look at our reference here, we can actually just copy this over as a reference. Let's zoom in here, and we want to create this inner frame within the attachment preview. So I'm going to duplicate this background layer. And let's scale this down, constraining the proportions. And let's maybe just tuck it in to be 54 by 54. We're going to need to adjust that corner radius to match. So I think 18 is what we're looking for. We can center it up within this frame. That's looking good. So let's start applying our colors. The background fill is going to be our accent color. And the background is going to be our accent background, and it'll be the stop point on the gradient. We already have the box shadows applied to both layers, and that gives it this kind of skeuomorphic look. Lastly, let's grab our type tool with T, and let's type out .pdf. And the fill for this will be high contrast for the light theme. And let's use a text style of body strong. We'll want to make sure that this is centered horizontally and vertically, and also centered within our design. Cool, let's rename these layers real quick. So this is the attachment preview text. And we'll just call this layer something like tile to evoke that it sits on top of the background. This component as a whole is going to be called document. And I forgot to include in the naming that the original attachment preview is for an image. So now we're ready to componentize. Control Command plus Alt Option and K. And those are our two attachment previews for the dark theme. So let's clean up our file here a little bit. Get our spacing nice and neat around these components. And let's drag out a copy of this frame so we can work on the light theme quickly. Let's rename this layer to be for the light theme and change the background color to main background light. The only change we need to make to the original image preview is let's change its drop shadow to be elevation to light. We can recomponentize this and rename this component to be light or the variation name. We're going to do a similar thing just for the background layer. We're going to change that to elevation to light. Recomponentize one more time, rename for the light theme, and our attachment previews are all done. So going back to our reference here, we have this message detail pane that we can now build out. And everything you see here is already componentized and ready to go. So I'm going to grab the message detail as a whole. Let's copy this out and drop it into our molecules page. So pasting that in, let's get it off to the side so we can reference it. And we'll drag out a new frame, and we'll call this the message detail for the dark theme. First thing on this frame, we can set main background dark, and then we'll drag out a nested frame that will represent the plate of the actual message detail component. So this is message detail dark as the actual component. This other frame is there just to group it for our documentation. Now this nested frame will have a fill of component background dark. And with that taken care of, we can pull in our reference a little closer here. So starting top to bottom, let's work on this message count thread. It's really hard to read because of the contrast issues that were part of the original design. So let's recreate it with our improved color and typography, and it should be much more legible. So first thing, let's simply type out 13 and give this a text fill of medium contrast for the dark theme. And this will need a type spec of body micro. Let's rename this to be thread count, and this will be the current message. Next up, we need that visual separator. So we can make that with a simple rectangle. Let's make it 12 pixels wide and 1 pixel in height. And if we zoom in here, we want it to be skewed on an angle. So let's try out 30 degrees. We need to go much steeper than that. So maybe it's actually 60 degrees that we're looking for. That looks correct to me. So let's rename this the thread count, and this will be the separator. And lastly, we can duplicate the current count and rename this total. And we can simply position this to the right. So now all of these we can select and get them arranged. So they're going to be centered vertically and have consistent spacing horizontally. So you could use Control or Command plus Alt or Option, Shift H to distribute them, or simply click on this menu option. And I think I want to bring this down to 8 pixels and see how I feel about that. Seems a little floaty, so let's bring it down to 4, and that looks much better. So we can take these elements, let's group them, and call it thread count. And if you want, you could probably make this a component as well. We're not reusing it anywhere in the design, so it doesn't really matter too much in this case. All right, so with this thing grouped up now, we can center it within our message detail pane and tuck it up to be 16 pixels from the top. It actually reminds me that we never really sized our message detail background as a whole, so we want to make sure this component has a nice reasonable size. If we go to our page here, we know that we have 4 pixel gaps between these major components all throughout our design. So let's drag out a rectangle just to roughly estimate the width that we're looking for. And let's make sure that it's 4 pixels from the other major elements of our design. Next, we can size the width. So we just drag it out to meet the right edge of our design. And then we have our overall width of 760. So even though these containers are going to be flexible when it comes time to code them, this will give us a nice consistent margin in our reference design. So going back to our message detail frame, let's size this down to be 760. And since this is already a frame, we can work on layout constraints as we go. So this will be centered horizontally and pinned to the top. All right, that's our thread count taken care of. Next up, let's start working on this header for our message. So we'll have an avatar, the sender name, a recipient list with our tooltip that we created, a reply button, delete button, and an options menu. All of these should be existing components and type specs, so this will go pretty quickly. First thing in our assets, let's find our avatar for the dark theme, and this will be the large variation. We're also going to need the small variation for the recipients. In addition to that, we want our tooltip, and this will be this expanded tooltip here. And we need some icon buttons. So let's just grab one of those that we can use. I believe these are in our molecules. So icon buttons dark. And I think we just need the default state here. We should have all the icons we need as part of a nested component. So I think that's all we need to drag into place for this. So you can see how fast it is now that we have our components to start scaffolding out our designs. So the first thing is let's get that sender name in place. So we'll hit T for the type tool. And this is the Dribbble team. We'll want this text to be left aligned. And let's set this to be title 3. We want this to be our high contrast for the dark theme. And I think that takes care of that piece of type. Let's rename it to message. This will be the sender name. We can vertically align it with the avatar and set the spacing between to be 16 pixels. Next up, let's work on the recipient list. So if we look at our reference design, we have 4 of them, and whichever one is currently hovered or focused pops up in the stacking order. So let's duplicate this avatar a few times. 1, 2, 3. And we'll just drag out each instance randomly here so we can get them all arranged. All right, these are all going to be centered vertically. The horizontal spacing, I think we want to be -8 pixels. I think that looks correct, but maybe let's reduce that down to -4 so there's not quite so much overlap. Now this third one is actually going to sit on top of the rest because of the z-index increase that we see when we hover it. So we'll just mock that for now. And let's just group this and call it recipients. And these are the avatars. Next, our tooltip is going to be aligned with this currently selected recipient. And as long as it's centered on that one, I think that's all the alignment we need. So we can group these together, and this will be the message recipients. Now, let's make sure that this is actually vertically centered with the sender name, and we can worry about our spacing after that. All right, so our vertical alignment looks good. We want it to be 16 pixels from the sender name, so let's just left align that, and then nudge it over twice for 16 pixels. Moving on, we have our message actions here. So we have 3 icon buttons: reply, trash, and the options menu. Grabbing our icon button, let's go into its layers and swap out this icon. So instead of search, we want reply. We will duplicate this twice. On the second instance, instead of reply, we want trash can. And our third one, we can pop open, and this will be the options icon. This third one in our design had less contrast, so let's go into this layer and change it to be medium contrast for the dark theme. All right, all of these are taken care of, so we'll center them up. I'm going to distribute the horizontal spacing here. And let's bring these down to maybe 16 pixels gap between them. We can group these with Control-Command-G and rename them with Control-Command-R. Let's call this the message actions. This will be vertically aligned with our other elements here. And now we can take these two chunks of content and left align one group and right align the other. In a reference design, it looks like the spacing was a little bit asymmetrical, so we want consistent margins around everything. I'm going to grab these left contents and make sure they are 64 pixels from the left edge, as well as 64 from the top. Our actions will do the same with the right padding. And again, let's drag that up to be centered with the avatar and other elements. So with that taken care of, we can grab all these elements, group them with Control or Command G, and rename it to message header. And these should actually be called message detail, just for consistency. So we can select multiple elements, Control or Command R, and we're going to replace message slash with message detail slash, just to speed things up. Let's group these left elements and say that these are for the sender. That way we have everything neatly grouped. Now with layout constraints within this frame, we want this to be pinned to the left and right and reference off the top. Our message sender and recipients, these will be pinned to the left, and the detail actions will be pinned to the right. So now if we were to resize this frame, we should see everything behaving pretty responsively. All right, continuing on, we have the actual message content now. So we have the timestamp, subject line. We have this kind of summary that is emphasized, the body copy, our highlight component, tooltip, and then we can move on to this bottom matter with the attachment list. First thing, let's hit T for the type tool, and this will be the timestamp. So typing out 3:30 p.m. Let's put this on medium contrast for the dark theme. And I think this will be our body micro type spec. All right, let's keep scaffolding out our text. So this should say, how are you getting on? As a greeting, this will be our title 1 for the subject line, and this will be high contrast for the dark theme. We should name these as we go. So this will be the message subject and our message timestamp. And these will actually be grouped in our message detail body. Continuing on with our content, we have the lorem ipsum text for the actual content, and then we'll have our salutations at the end. So I'm just going to copy this out real quick. We will want this to have the body strong type spec. That's looking good. And let's make sure that it's set to resize for auto height. So that way we can actually have this behave a little bit more responsively. All right, we'll just set it around there for now and get the spacing figured out in a minute. So let's rename this. Let's call it the message intro. Continuing on, let me copy out the main content of the message. And with the type tool, we'll paste this in. And we'll want this to be body default. And for both of these can be the medium contrast for the dark theme. Again, we'll want this content to be auto height, and we'll just bring that in to a random width for now. Lastly, let's copy this, paste it in one more time, and we will create our salutations here. So greetings and Charlie. All right, let's get these layers arranged and put into the detail body. So this will be the message body and the message salutation. Now all of these elements we want to left align, and let's vertically space these out. Let's try 16 pixels as a start. All right, so we can finesse this spacing between specific elements now. Let's say 4 pixels between the timestamp and the subject line. And we want a little more separation between the subject and intro. So let's say 32. And between paragraphs, let's just set this to be maybe 24 vertically. I think that looks good in terms of vertical rhythm. Now let's get the horizontal layout going. So we want to left align this with the rest of our content and increase its width to hit on the right edge. So that way there's 64 pixels of left and right padding. I believe these nested text frames should have resized accordingly, so that looks good. Let's make sure that these individual lines or this inline text is set to trim out any extra space. All right, we're looking pretty good. I think the last thing is to bring in our highlights. So we have this multi-line highlight that's going on, as well as this add to reminder tooltip. So in our assets, let's go into our atoms. We want tooltips for the dark theme, this action tooltip, as well as a multi-line highlight. So we have our end point, and let's find the start point as well. There we go. These will need to sit above our message body for the correct stacking order. Now, the start, let's get it visually aligned here. I'm going to turn the opacity down just temporarily to make sure we can align this. So in our layer, let's turn this down to 10%, or actually 50. And let's get it aligned with the underneath text, just for mock-up purposes. All right, we can change that opacity back to 100% now. Let's do the same with the end of our message highlight here. And see if everything snaps into place. Looks like there was a typo in one of these layers. Ah, it's actually in our component. Okay, let's fix that up real quick. Yep, there it is. Tomorrow with one M. I'm sure people saw that in a previous episode and were bothered by it. Let's make sure everything resized as needed. I think all these look good, but we're gonna have to check on our light theme here. Yep, it looks like the widths didn't auto size. Let's make sure they resize to fit. And we might just have to bring this in manually. So we want to find that first pixel where it goes to a single line. So I'm going to hit Control or Command and use the left or right arrows to adjust the width. Let's do the same down here. I'm going into the nested instance and truncating that as needed. All right, looks like we hit those widths. And now we can make sure that each of these outer components are resized to fit. Cool. So just cleaning up our components a bit. Now this instance should be corrected, even though we could have just customized the text, but it's good to make sure that everything looks as you would expect. Now, since our width changed, we're going to use Control or Command and tuck in the width with the left and right arrows till it's just on a single line there. All right, that's looking good. We can change the opacity back to 100%. And our mock-up of this component is coming together. Now, one thing we discussed when we built these tooltips is that if you're doing a multi-line selection, it should probably be centered within the content. That way, regardless of where you make the text selection, the positioning is always consistent when it comes time to code this out. So I'm just going to tuck that in to be on top of this line of text and centered within the frame. So to finalize our constraints for the detail body, we have the timestamp pinned to the left and top, same with our title. The intro should be pinned to left and right, as well as the top. And we'll do the same for our message body. The salutation, I should have left that to be left. This right highlight, let's pin to the right. Obviously, this is going to kind of break down if our text resizes because the text content and the highlight would need to move. But just for our mockup, let's go ahead and do this. In our tooltip, we want this to be horizontally centered. Looking good. We're going to need a little more space here to finish out this message detail pane. So let's drag out a little more height to this. All right, last thing, let's get our attachment section going. So we have some icons, some buttons, and the attachment previews. So let's go hunting for those. We have our dark icons. We want our attachment icon specifically. That looks good. Next up, we need our icon buttons. So we'll drag in just a default instance for now. And lastly, our attachment previews. And I really wish Figma would address the contrast issues in the app. It's very difficult to read what these different sections are called. So we're going to want to grab our attachment preview that we created, one for a document and one for an image. Great. All right, so we just need some text here. Let's say this is attachment. We will want the body micro type spec and a medium contrast for the dark theme. All right, we can drag out these random components. Let's go ahead and just group them for now. This will be the message detail, and we can call it the footer. Getting things roughly arranged here. One thing is we want our icon to also be medium contrast, so let's customize that. Just a subtle visual change there. These will be vertically centered. And let's bring the spacing down to 16 pixels. So if we left align this, let's get our attachment buttons established first. So that way we can establish the horizontal rule between them and figure out the correct width here. All right, so for this first button, we need a different icon. So let's go into the nested layer. This will be our view attachment button. And then if we duplicate this, the second one will be for downloading the attachment. Let's put 16 pixels of spacing between them and get them right aligned with the rest of our message content. We'll snap them into place to vertically center with the attachment icon over here. And now let's put a 1 pixel tall rule between them and figure out what spacing we want. So I think I want this to be 16 pixels margin around this. So we want to reduce the width down to get that proper spacing. So we have 23. So we need to move 7 pixels to the right. So holding Control or Command, let's do right 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And now we should have 16 pixels gap. This is also going to be our medium contrast color to match the rest. And for these icon buttons, I think I want to leave that high contrast since they are interactive. Okay, lastly, let's rename this. This will be the attachment rule. We have our buttons, and then let's get our image preview, our PDF preview, and a copy of the image preview to the side. We can simply group this and call it attachment previews. And make sure the alignment makes sense here. So let's maybe do 32 pixels of spacing around it since it does belong to this section. All right, I think that's looking pretty good. For the footer itself, let's maybe tuck this up till we find a nice position for everything. It's maybe 32 pixels. I might want to change that in the future, but that seems good for now. All right, with that, the last thing to do is adjust the height of the actual message detail frame. So let's tuck that up into the bottom, and then using Control or Command plus Shift, let's go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and that'll give us 64 pixels of padding. Cool, and with all of that, I think we're ready to componentize this message detail. We can get rid of our reference here. Rearrange our layers. Let's get our documentation looking nice and clean. So 32 and 32 on the left and top. And lastly, drag out a copy of this for the light theme. So this will be message detail light. And now we're just going to do a lot of instance swapping to retheme this. So main background light, the message detail itself is going to have component background light, and we can just speed through this. All right, and with all that work done, we can simply hit Alt or Option and L to collapse those layers down. Let's check our work real quick. That's looking good. I may want to address the tooltip in the future and some other styling, but this is a good mock-up for now. So we can recomponentize this to be message detail light. And now we're ready to move on to the actual feed of messages that you would see in this thread. So we'll want to create this overall container real quick. So the height of this will need to be the same as our inbox. So if we go to our organisms, let's go to inboxes. And let's actually just copy this over as a quick reference. So we want our overall height to be 1190. So we can drag in a couple instances of our newly created molecules that will be the message details. So let's drag in one and get it roughly positioned. And we can get rid of some of this reference here. So let's call this message details, or maybe the message thread is a better name. This will have a background of main background dark. And we can get rid of our inboxes that were there. It's just a reference. So now we have one message. So let's drag out a copy beneath it and figure out what spacing we want. All right, maybe 32 is good for the spacing vertically. Now we can wrap these in a frame and clip the content so we get the idea that there's multiple of these in a row, but we don't have to deal with any overflow. I might change the spacing to be 16 in between them just to tuck them together a bit more. And hitting Control or Command plus Alt or Option and G, let's wrap these in a frame. Let's call this the message thread or message list, whatever you prefer. And we'll set this to clip content, bringing that bottom of the component up. And let's make sure this is trimmed even further. So we want Control or Command plus Shift, and we'll hit up 4 times. So that way we have a spacing of 32 around everything, and we hit our target height of 1190. So with that, let's componentize this and call it message thread for the dark theme. We'll drag out a copy and simply swap out our dark detail components for the light theme. That's looking good. Recomponentize and rename. And to keep consistent, I guess we actually want our main background for the white theme for this documentation. All right, just getting that arranged, and I think we're ready to drop this in place with our refined design. So we'll take this whole message detail chunk, delete that, go into our assets panel, under organisms, the message thread, get that snapped right into place. Make sure we got all of our spacing looking correct. That looks great to me. Bring it down in our layers. And then we'll do the same for our light mockup over here. So we'll make a copy of this. Let's just drag it into the other frame. Snap it into place. We can just right align this if needed, and bottom as well. And lastly, let's swap this instance out for the light variation. All right, so with that taken care of, we've completed our message detail pane. In the next episode, we simply need to build out this reply pane and then all of our design for this project will be complete. After we finish the design, we're going to start prepping for development and then code out this entire user interface, which will be a really fun addition to this series. So thank you so much for watching, and be sure to look out for the next episode.